I'm David Chen from youtube.com/DaveChensky. I'm here with Patrick Willems. We are here to talk about his latest video about the Mask of Zorro. Patrick, how are you doing today, man?
All things considered, and all things going on with the world, I'm pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing okay. You know, I'm broadcasting right now from Seattle, and right now, as we're recording this, it's March 20th. So we're in the middle of a coronavirus lockdown. And when I say lockdown, I don't mean like there's laws preventing people from going outside or anything, but just like all businesses are closed, all theaters are closed. And it's just a really surreal environment. And I just feel like before we dive into this fun Martin Campbell film, it's probably worth like taking a second to acknowledge the fact that we're living in strange and unprecedented times right now that are impacting lots of people in different ways. And it's impacted you because you are currently kind of sheltered at your parents' house, right?
Yeah, it's really strange. I mean, what we're doing right now is pretty much the extent of socializing
Yeah.
that I've done in days. I came up here a little over a week ago. I was only supposed to be here for 3 days, just to shoot the video that we're talking about. And then just looking at the news and how everything was and how things seemed back in New York City, I kind of realized I don't need to rush back right away. I can edit this on my laptop. I have my laptop with me. Maybe I'll just stick around for a bit longer. And I'm still here a week later. And it's a nice secluded spot. It's kind of like it's a house in the woods, which basically means I don't see other human beings outside of my parents.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems a lot more surreal. Just like from what I've seen of New York, that seems a lot stranger.
You mean the city itself?
The city itself,
Yeah.
yes. Because that like here it's always secluded, and so
Right.
I'm not really experiencing like the emptiness of the streets in the same way.
Do you have any plans to go back, or are you just kind of hang in there for the foreseeable?
That's the thing. I do have to get back probably next week just to take care of some stuff before the end of the month, and I'm really just trying to figure out the cleanest, simplest way to do that, and like what the best time is. So yeah, I'm just kind of playing it all by ear.
Yeah, same. I mean, we have kind of hunkered down with a few weeks worth of food, and we're planning to like not leave the house as much as possible over here in Seattle. So if you're out there, you're watching this, hope you're doing well, hope you're staying safe, hope you're social distancing, flattening the curve, washing your hands, doing all the things that the CDC and our health experts are telling you to do during this very challenging and unprecedented time. I mean, I think that like the movie industry in particular, it's changing so quickly what's happening right now on a day-to-day basis. You know, just learned this morning, like Onward, a movie that was out in theaters a couple weeks ago. You
Yeah,
can now, apparently, by the time you're watching this, you'll be able to go and rent it, and it'll be on Disney Plus in a couple weeks.
it's like a Disney movie that cost like $200 million
Yes.
to make.
That was out in theaters
I
like 2 weeks ago
I
on
know
Disney Plus within like
that's so
a
weird.
month of its open. It's like just wow. Uh, Big questions about whether or not that's going to be the model going forward, but we'll see. A lot of people are saying like this is going to change theatrical movie going forever, which who knows what's going to happen? Who knows what's going to happen? Maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that later. In the meantime, let's talk about a movie that you can easily access at home right now. On the
Yes.
U.S., in the U.S., you can access this movie on Netflix, The Mask of Zorro. Patrick Willems, this is an awesome movie. Why did you decide to make a video about The Mask of Zorro?
So I should say, I've known for the past couple months that I was going to do another installment in the Patrick Explains series for March. And for a while, honestly, since I think last November, I had a different movie planned to talk about in this episode. And one that as I was just thinking about it and thinking about my arguments for it, I I was feeling less and less strongly about as time went on. I may still end up making that episode, but then I just maybe, I don't know, like sometime in February, I think, I saw that The Mask of Zorro was on Netflix, and I loved it as a kid. I saw it in theaters. I would watch it. Like it was maybe my favorite movie between the years 1998 and 2000,
Mm.
and I just hadn't watched it in almost 20 years. And I rewatched it and immediately was like, this movie rules. I love it. Why don't we talk about it? Why have I not thought about it in so long? And pretty instantaneously, I decided this has got to be the next like the next what I talk about in the next episode. And I just even mentioning the movie on Twitter, just like so many people immediately like jumped in, were like, yes, oh my God, I haven't watched it in so long. I love it. And it really felt like the time was right. Like I felt this way about Zorro, and it seemed like uh yeah, people, like a lot of people were just ready to rediscover it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, people in the chat room are asking like, what was the other movie? I assume you're gonna keep that in your back pocket until the next, or are you gonna? Are you comfortable revealing what the other movie was?
Uh, I'd rather hold on
Yeah.
to it for now.
All right.
I've got a constantly changing list of movies that I want to use for this specific series, and there's very specific criteria for what I want, for what movies get talked about
Mhm.
in this series, and so I'm gonna hold on to it for now.
Okay. And we should point out, by the way, that a lot of feedback from the last episode of this commentary was, "Hey, let's have a structured conversation about the video before you start taking questions." So we will take questions, but they'll mostly be at the end of the video. So just hang in there. If you are in the chat room live right now, I will be going through a bunch of your questions. But in the meantime, we're going to talk about Mask of Zorro. We're going to talk about Patrick's video first. And yeah, I think Mask of Zorro is awesome, and it's like the best of the '90s, basically, right? Like,
Yeah,
you got uh, Martin Campbell at the top of his game, Anthony Hopkins, Antonio Banderas, Catherine Zeta-Jones, uh, almost what seems like almost completely practical effects and stunt work, and uh, I think that's like one of the reasons it's almost like, I don't know if this is a good analogy, Patrick, but it's like, why don't the kids like 2D hand drawn animation these days? They like the
mhm.
3D. This feels like the 2D hand drawn animation of like action movies. You,
That's a great
you know what I
analogy,
mean? It's
or
like,
even of like
yeah, go
of
ahead.
superhero movies, because it sort of is one.
Yeah, yeah, it's like a 2D hand drawn animation version of a superhero movie. It's like, still you can admire the excellence of it. It's very beautiful. But at the same time, the kids just aren't into that kind of stuff these days, and that's a shame, I think. Um,
I do wonder. Yeah, I was thinking about this while I was making it, and I was thinking like, if considering how good this movie is, how fun it is, how exciting it is, if this were to just get released now, would people just reject it? Would they embrace it as like, oh wow, this is so unlike all the stuff we're used to? Uh, because I mean, like I said it in the video, but we're so used to like movies. Our current version of this movie now, it ends with a big CGI battle scene, and I think it's almost always more exciting and more engaging when it's the climactic scene is two people, in a clearly shot, well choreographed sword fight.
yeah.
And I wonder, like, how would a 14-year-old respond to a big action movie that ends with a sword fight like the one in this movie? Would they be like, "Oh my God, this is amazing," or would they say like where's my like CGI planet exploding? Like this is
Where's
boring.
blue beam in sky? Where's the
Right.
blue beam going into the sky that we are all used to in superhero films?
That's what the Mask of Zorro was missing. A blue beam in the sky.
Indeed, indeed. So tell us about the construct or premise or conceit of this video, Patrick, because this one's a little bit different than some of the other Patrick Explains videos.
It is. So every other one has been in the same format of in the dining room in my parents' house. And it's always like that. And back in, I think it was early 2018, when we did the episode on Alien Covenant, that an ongoing story arc really started forming through these videos. That's where we started having the previously on recap at the beginning. And I know not everyone cares about the ongoing story in these silly video essays, but I find it really rewarding to make, and I have a lot of fun with it. And so I like putting effort into that part. And we've had the whole story mapped out for over a year, for a while now, and I've known where it was going to go. And I knew that this episode would be set at a deposition, that we were going to finally for at least one or two episodes step away from the house, and just because that's the way the story was going as it would escalate. And I knew that it was going to take place in a conference room during a deposition, and that was also going to require finding a conference room, and also it's easy to get a conference room in New York City. There's like a million sites where you can just rent them. They're available everywhere. They aren't as easy to come by in my hometown, which is where we'd be shooting it, because that's where my parents are. And then I also knew that I would have to find other cast members, to play the lawyers, also in my hometown. And because of all of these things, it took a while for it to come together. I would just periodically do some research about like, okay, Googling like conference rooms, Saratoga Springs, New York. And then finally, it all started clicking together, and in the past couple months. And so, and then finally, when we shot it, we shot this video exactly a week ago. I booked the conference room for 4 hours. And so we had only 4 hours to get in, shoot the entire thing, and get out, it was a stressful 4 hours.
Yeah,
but,
because there's probably like 15 minutes worth of dialogue / monologue in that room that you do, right? Roughly?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's like a lot to do in 4 hours.
It is. The way we did it was I got in half an hour before the cast showed up, set up all the lights and camera and audio gear. Then the cast came in, we shot all the dialogue scenes. Yeah. That took longer than I had anticipated. And usually for my like monologue essay part, I usually do 2 takes all the way through. And I almost always use the second take. The first one usually ends up being more to just get a sense of like the rhythms with the script. And this time I realized at the end that, I only have time for 1 take. So I'd better do a good job. And I was really relieved that I did a better first take than I usually do, because that's all I had to use.
Well, I'm glad it all worked out. I forget, have any of your other, like, I've seen obviously non-you characters in your other videos, like your parents and your roommates and some of your friends and, friend of the channel Griffin and so on. But like, have you ever used like actors beyond the scope of like our, online film world or your parents before?
No.
Yeah, so this is the first time then, right?
The cast members in this video are family friends. With I did not go out and like audition actors.
Gotcha.
They are people that I already knew. The guy playing my lawyer is actually my art teacher from elementary school.
Wow.
Who I've known since who was just, and the reason that I cast him is that he always liked Zorro and would make jokes about Zorro. And I was like, you know what? It's just funny when he says the word Zorro. So I'm going to put him in this video and just have him say that word as many times as I can. That was my whole logic behind it. But yeah, this time, because usually I'm casting, usually the like framing narrative parts involve like myself and my friends. And so I just get, actual friends of mine who have usually have some kind of acting experience. And this is the first time I was like, I actually need like real adults, like not 30-year-olds, but people
what are you saying, Patrick? Like 30-year-olds can't be lawyers? No, I'm just joking. I think the fact that they are a little bit older does add some verisimilitude to the situation. So
thank you. That was my goal. But yeah, this is the first time that I did sort of reach outside of the circles that I'm used to working with. So yeah, but I'm happy with how it all turned out.
We got some comments in the chat. Mellow Jello 100 says, "Give the art teacher an Oscar," and WC Wit says it worked. So just so you know, people seem to think the casting
Perfect.
worked out really well.
I'm so glad.
There's a few.
I don't think he's seen the video yet because he doesn't have email, and I'm not sure he knows how YouTube
I
works.
see. All right. Then then his life is truly blessed.
Yes.
Okay, so there's let's talk about some of the things that you bring up in the video that I thought were pretty interesting. One of them is that there's actually, I think Matt Singer from Screen Crush helped to coin this term called legacy-quel, right?
Yeah.
Legacy-quel, right? Where like you bring in people from the old guard to then like pass the baton or the torch onto the new generation.
Hmm.
Force Awakens being a great example of this. Like Han Solo's in Force Awakens, he's passing on the thing to the new generation. Um, and there's been many other examples where they're like theoretically reboot something, but you have characters from the old thing there to kind of be like, hey, we're all okay with this. We're all passing it on. Like everything's great. This is not really that because I don't, as far as I know, Anthony Hopkins didn't play the original Zorro, right? um,
Not from what I've heard.
so, but he is playing like the Zorro character, and he's kind of like passing on the idea of the
He's
Zorro
the
character.
same character from like the 1940 film.
Correct. He's playing the Zorro character, and then kind of passing it on to Antonio Banderas, who kind of reinvents it as this a kind of person who came up from more hard scrabble lifestyle to become Zorro, right? And you bring up the idea of class being something that this movie helps to solve, which is, I think, a great point that we do have in our pop culture. We do have a lot of like billionaires trying to solve our problems, right? Like Tony Stark being another great example. I'm wondering if you feel like there's something that in our age is really like comforting about that concept. That's like, why do we see that? Like when you watch like the Iron Man series and you watch the new Spider-Man, right? The idea that like, hey, by the way, Tony Stark built this entire thing that can literally murder anyone on the planet, you know, and where he's giving it to a college student, you know. Pretty disturbing stuff to put in a blockbuster movie, in my opinion. Also, like
Yeah.
Batman, you know, Dark Knight. Obviously, he like at the end of that movie, he like destroys the whole surveillance apparatus. But still, it's like, the fact that he had access to it is kind of pretty rough. Anyway, just
And he had the unlimited resources to make it in the first place.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, also what you're getting at, and also you brought up my biggest issue with the MCU Spider-Man movies,
Mm,
which is that in this world of like in the Marvel universe, when you have people who are you know everyone from like Tony Stark to like Captain America, who was this like original like government sponsored like super professional superhero. Peter Parker was always supposed to be like the ordinary guy with real problems, and so and has to worry about like money and stuff like that. And so it does bug me how in these new movies he's basically like he has his billionaire like sort of adoptive father who just kind of
yeah.
gives him everything
Yeah.
and solves a lot of the problems that character is supposed to have. And
Yeah, it really kind of takes away a significant component of what we thought was like a core part of Spider-Man as a character, right?
right, I mean, I remember one of my big takeaways when I first saw Spider-Verse was because I think this was coming after it was the same year as like Black Panther had come that year, like Aquaman was coming out, and I was like, and movies that I like, but I was like, wow, it's really nice to watch a superhero movie where the superhero is not like a king or a billionaire or someone like funded by the government
Yeah,
and is just a normal person.
yeah.
Yeah, I wonder like because the origins of that go back so far because like Zorro was created in like the early 1900s, Batman in 1939. Even things like I mean I could be mixing this up a little bit, but like with Robin Hood,
Yeah.
it doesn't he originally come from money?
I don't. I'm not 100%
Aren't the
sure, but
Loxleys
in the latest incarnation of Robin Hood, I believe that is the case.
the Taron Egerton one?
Yeah, the Taron Egerton one. I think so.
Have
I
not seen
actually
it.
watched that movie, and to this moment, as I'm talking to you right now, I still don't really remember. Um, yeah. I can't. Don't write in. Don't comment. Not 100% sure about my Robin Hood thoughts, but suffice to say, I think there is. If I'm to speculate on like why it's so appealing, I think it's the idea that like, hey, like the oligarchs who run our society, it's nice to think that maybe they look out for the common folk every now and then. Like there's something we can't control whether or not they're running the society, but at least maybe we can imagine that they might be benevolent in their rule, right?
Right. I think also part of it would be that because these kind of superheroes and like costumed heroes, vigilantes or whatever, there has always been the sort of like power fantasy element of it.
Hmm.
Like, wow, I wish I could put on this cool costume and go and beat people up for like righteous causes.
Yeah.
And I do think like for part of that is also that well, part of these characters there has also been like sort of the wealth fantasy. Like, wow, wouldn't it also be great to just have this like luxurious wealthy lifestyle where you have all these resources? Like these are fantasy characters,
Yeah.
and I think the wealth part of it is part of the fantasy.
Yeah, I think that the wealth. I think the wealth is interesting because it makes it so that if you are fighting crime, it's not out of necessity. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
that. And what I mean by that is, if you're, one could easily imagine a character who uh, is so down on their luck and is so deprived of resources that they need to like fight people and battle people in order to survive, right? But these people do not need to do that, right?
Hmm.
And so as a result, that they're fighting people out of the goodness of their own heart to better society, and for no other reason. And
Right.
there's like, strangely, there's like more of a purity to it that way, right?
Yeah. That's actually just a great topic for a video right there.
Yeah. So, but it's other than the, let's say, I don't know if whitewashing is too strong of a term. It's probably the right term. Other than the whitewashing that the Mask of Zorro performs, which you comment on in the video, I do think that component of it, where like they reinvent the character as somebody who's from a different class, is an improvement on the original story, right? So like,
Yeah.
it's one of those rare reboots, sequels, whatever that like improves on what came before it, and that's always nice to see. So
It does. And I also think what helps Zorro, what puts Zorro in an easier position than something like, honestly, The Force Awakens or I mentioned in the video, but like Batman Beyond, is that um, people don't have quite the same attachment to the original character. Like people are, the idea of anyone replacing like Bruce Wayne as Batman.
yeah,
Like I remember even as a kid, that was like a crazy idea. Or like someone coming along to like be the new Star Wars hero that's not Luke Skywalker, Leia, or Han Solo. That's like those are huge shoes to fill. And Zorro, it's like people are aware of Zorro, but I bet most people going in to see that movie in 98, like myself included as a 10-year-old, could not have told you that his name was Don Diego de la Vega.
right,
He was just
right.
Zorro.
They had very few like associations with it. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Another great point you bring up in the video is about uh, romance, basically. And
Yeah.
I had an interesting experience a few years ago, Patrick. I was going to a movie screening, and it was packed. You've been to like an advanced screening before, and like sometimes an advanced screening gets so full that it actually gets tense in the theater because like there's all these like there's tension of like everyone wants to make sure they get a good seat, and like if they don't get a good seat they complain about it, and like you're just like like I wonder if something bad is gonna happen, like because if someone's gonna come to blows, and like yeah. And the movie was 50 Shades of Grey. um it was like completely packed theater, 50 Shades of Grey, and the movie went on to be like massively successful.
Right.
And I was sitting there watching, graphic S&M and sex scenes in 50 Shades of Grey with like 450 strangers. And I realized that, wow, it is actually really rare to see any like sex scenes in movies these days. Like there's just, I can't remember the last time I saw a sex scene in like a major Hollywood release.
Yeah, they seem to mostly come in like awards contender dramas.
Yeah. And it did, like I think there's like a wide variety of reasons that has occurred, but you compare this to, you actually say like this is a superhero film that actually has like heat in it. And like the biggest comparison you can make is to the MCU, where, as you point out, like there's very few, like the romance. What romance there is extremely clumsy, and like probably the closest thing I can think of to a romance in the MCU is maybe like between Ant-Man and the Wasp, or um, Natasha and Bruce Banner, right? Kind of, but you know what I mean. Like, there's
Which
no,
gets cut off,
yeah,
abruptly. I mean, I think probably the strongest romantic relationship in the MCU is Tony Stark and Pepper Potts.
yeah.
Because
Yeah, that's
I
true.
don't,
Which
I
like
remember
hasn't
that.
even been present for like 5 movies or whatever, right?
Right. I
Yeah.
remember that being refreshing when the first Iron Man movie came out, because it's like, oh, these are adults, and it actually, we're jumping in, and they actually have like there's like a relationship between these characters that's been going on for a while.
Yeah.
It actually felt like adults who actually like had complex
Yeah,
feelings.
yeah, yeah.
But then the weird thing about it, and I mentioned this in the whole like 3-part MCU thing I did a year ago, is that so many of the major developments in their relationship happened off
Off
camera
screen,
between movies.
right?
Yeah, and it's like the movies, they really don't want to spend much time worrying about like romantic relationships, and so it's like they have these sort of like they basically never really want things to move beyond the Peter Quill Gamora point,
Mm.
where it's just kind of like it's like a little flirty, and then anything more serious than that, it's like they just put it off screen.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I want to read a couple comments in the chat room. The Wishful Thinker says, given how abusive Hollywood practices have been around sex scenes, I'm not bothered by their absence. But Zorro shows how you don't need a sex scene to have genuine grown-up sexual dynamic. Yeah, let me just make clear, like, I agree with it. I'm not saying, like, why aren't there more sex scenes? But I think there's a difference between, like, sex scenes and, like, romance that actually feels like it has, like, genuine emotion in it, right? That's
Right.
how I would characterize it? So, like, please like take away the correct message, which is not that I want more sex scenes, but that like, hey, like romance that shows like connection and attraction, like these are things that we haven't really seen in a lot of our major blockbuster movies recently. Also, Connor Nielsen references the best sex scene in recent memory is probably Blade Runner 2049, and a lot of that deals with social awkwardness a lot of people have about sex, which that's a great example. So
yeah, and I just think like the reason I brought this up in the Zorro video is because as I was watching the movie again, I was remembering how like a relationship like this, like a romantic subplot like this movie has, was such a staple of just this sort of movie for so long.
yeah,
And it seems to have gone away. It's like, especially if you look at like even older movies, it's like, oh right, of course there is going to be, they're gonna in like 50s or 60s Hollywood, they'll cast like the two most beautiful actors in the world, and they'll they'll really focus a lot of like time in this adventure movie on their relationship and investing the audience in it, and that seems like now it's kind of an afterthought in these kinds of movies. It's like they're only aiming for like the 13-year-old boy audience who they assume doesn't want to see that stuff.
Yeah, it is weird and kind of sad. Like when I'm watching your video, I'm like, oh yeah, like we used to have kind of romance that was like electrifying, like that in our movies, and it's kind of rare to see that. Certainly in theatrically released movies these days.
Right.
So kind of a bummer. Now here's where I will have some beef with you, Patrick Willems.
Yes.
Is you talk in the video about like how iconography is really important and like sometimes you just gotta take the sword and like let it shine in the sunlight really slowly because it looks cool. And I do think that some of the more recent Marvel films like do invest in that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? Like if specifically you look at the Avengers movies, you know,
Hmm.
there's that famous shot. Maybe I can find
Do you mean from the first movie?
from every one of the movies. I would say every Avengers movie, including like the most recent one, has some like iconic, like amazing shot of like all the actors, you know, or some of the actors in some like really incredible situation. And I do think there is some iconography there. Here, let me. You won't be able to see this, but I'm going to put this in the chat room, and you can
Okay.
see, or maybe you can see it. But
Is
yeah,
it from the portal scene?
I'm putting a shot from the Avengers 1 in here, which is like the sort of shot like when they're in New York City and the camera's like spinning around them and like everyone's like, you know, getting ready to fight off the Urukai or whatever the hell those alien things are. You know, so like
Dave, they're the
oh,
Chitauri.
thank you. Yes. So so do you know what I mean? Like I do feel like that iconography does kind of exist. Josh Whedon, you know, being particularly instrumental in a lot of it, but what do you make of that statement, Patrick?
Uh, I don't really disagree. I think the stuff that I'm thinking of
Yeah.
is when these happen in uh, like in the Avengers movies, I think they are um, they're more they're less theatrical than the ones that I'm talking about. You know, I'm thinking about stuff like, you know, the end of like the '89 Batman movie, which ends with that like the camera like rising up through like all of Gotham City and
Mm-hmm.
just ending on this shot of Batman just sort of posing on a skyscraper with like the bat signal in the sky. Or also in that movie, the part where the Batwing flies up and like poses in front of the moon, which is so silly, but I love it.
Yeah.
Uh, and it's those little things like when they happen in when you get like, you know, these sort of iconic images in the newer ones. I think they only happen when they are like extremely rooted in the narrative.
Like
And
example, Batman in The Dark Knight Rises setting fire to a bridge in the formation of a bat sign. Would that be one of them?
uh uh
Because I mean,
you know,
it's part of the story, right?
it is. I mean, this is, you know, one of those things like because there's no strict definitions for any of these things.
Yeah.
But like, when was the last time you really saw something like those opening and closing shots of Zorro, where it's just him like backlit on a stage carving a Z on the screen?
I see. So you're kind of longing for those meta moments, like those meta textual moments of like it's not in the narrative of it's not even in the reality of the film.
Right.
It's just a dude doing something badass. You know,
It's just like it was when I was working on this, and it was really when I was kind of digging into like the Martin Campbell thing, and I was like, oh wait, this is just their James Bond gun barrel.
yes. Yes.
It's just, and I'm just like, I kind of wish every character had their version of like the Bond gun barrel. That to me would be cool.
Yes.
I
Uh,
want to know what like the Captain America one would be, where you'd like look forward to it in each movie, and maybe they'd make like a minor modification in this one.
no disagreement there, but you know, I have a feeling that's not coming back, Patrick.
It's not.
of
It's
all
not
the
going
things you
to.
brought up, like we talked about romance, we've talked about practical stunts. It's like of all the things we've talked about, that's the one thing that I think is going to be pretty rare these days.
Although you never know, cinema, you know, is weirdly cyclical, and there could be some point where like really theatrical movies, like or really theatrical action movies, come back into style in like 30 years. You never know.
All right, let's take questions from the chat room. Let's take a few questions.
Sure.
The most pressing one, I think, several people have been asking, but this one comes from Sean Grant, who asks, What are your thoughts on the Zorro sequel, Patrick?
Of course, I have never seen it.
Here's the thing. I love Mask of Zorro. I've probably seen that movie 3, 4 times, maybe 5. Have never seen the sequel. Never
Yeah,
seen the sequel.
it is so weird to me that they waited 7 years to make it.
Haven't you ever been curious about it though? Like it's so weird that you and we both love Mask of Zorro. We've both seen it. We've never. It hasn't even been curious. Like we haven't even felt like, hey, maybe we should just check it out, see if it's any good. Like that desire has never crossed our minds, basically.
Well, I think part of it is for me. No one has ever said anything to encourage me to see it.
Yeah.
The reviews that was the thing. Like when I was in high school and I heard they're making a Zorro sequel and like the lead actors are back and Martin Campbell is back, I was like, oh, I am intrigued. And then I saw the trailer and I was like, that looks kind of boring. And it looks like okay. The things, and I will say, when working on this video, I watched the trailer to the sequel again, and I did some research about the reviews for it and all that, and it just looks like a bummer. It seems like again, I have not seen this movie, but it appears that they've saddled Alejandro and Elena with just like a precocious kid, and Elena is in like the buzzkill role of like being like, oh, when are you going to stop doing this Zorro stuff and take care of your family? And I'm like, what a disservice to her character to do that to it. And I was like, this seems like the kind of like boring, hacky sequel that no one has ever liked. And I don't really need to like satiate that curiosity.
Yeah.
I'm fine as I am.
I think same, man. Same. Which is weird because you'd think that two people who love Mask of Zorro would at some point have been interested in watching the sequel, but no, didn't happen.
I know.
Didn't happen.
Hey, thankfully Martin Campbell recovered immediately and did Casino Royale right after that.
Indeed. All right, so W.C. Witt points out the lack of that sort of iconography was an issue with the Power Rangers reboot a couple years ago. Power Rangers without posing is like a musical without dance.
Wow, I didn't see that movie, but that's a great point.
I think so as well. Power Rangers should have hired you as a consultant, I think is really where we're going here.
I mean, like, what is Power Rangers if they don't like backflip up onto their Megazord and just do a kung fu pose?
Yeah.
Like, what's the point?
I 100% agree. Anyone else in the chat room have any other questions? Feel free to let us know. Oh, by the way, Robert Piscatelli in the chat says, guess who wrote the sequel?
Kurtzman and Orsi.
Kurtzman and Orsi, a.k.a. some of the most talented / also non-talented people in the industry. Here's a question from the Wishful Thinker. In the research for the video, did you watch the Douglas Fairbanks or Tyrone Powers versions? Incredible stunts from Fairbanks' parkour in the first and swordplay in the second with Rathbone.
Yes, I watched the Tyrone Power one, and I watched sections of the Fairbanks one.
And do you agree with the Wishful Thinker's assessment?
I do, yeah. There is totally some great swordplay, great stunt work. It's also interesting seeing the points where they kind of link up. Like there is, there's a scene in the Tyrone Power one where Zorro, in his civilian identity, goes to like a fancy dinner party and then has a dance scene with his romantic lead. It's tamer and less charged than the 90s one. But yeah, but there are looking at that one, I could definitely feel like there were certain traditions and certain just premises for scenes that the Mask of Zorro was carrying on.
All right, I think we have one last question here. This one comes in from Soren Hogland. He says, you made the comparison to how sexless the MCU is in comparison. Which relationship in the MCU do you think would be most improved by some genuine heat?
Okay, thinking through the different relationships in these movies. I mean, the relationship in the MCU that I care about the most
Yeah.
is Steve Rogers and Peggy Carter, who only really got one movie together.
Mm.
Um, and it's like, if I feel like if they wanted to actually make Steve and Sharon Carter a thing, that really could have used some of that. But also, you know what? I'm weird, crazy opinion. I am going to say T'Challa and what was Lupita Nyong'o's character's name again in Black Panther?
I'm about to tell you in a few seconds that it was Nakia.
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 That's it.
That's what I meant to say. Nakia.
Yeah, because I both great actors. I like her character a lot. I think if they went that extra step and devoted a bit more time just to their relationship and put some more heat in there, I think that would like bring the movie to another level.
Peter in the chat asks, "Why do you think we haven't gotten a Zorro reboot yet? We've had so many Robin Hood reboots, but no Zorro for some reason."
Great question. I think, well, Zorro is not in the public domain.
Yeah.
Someone has those rights. It isn't like Robin Hood where anyone can go make a new one. And so, I mean, it's a great question. Does Sony still have the Zorro rights?
I'm looking this up online right now, and it says Zorro is in the public domain.
I was looking at this the other
Yeah.
day. There was like a big trial about it in like 2018, but I don't know if a verdict. Like I could not really find a conclusive answer.
I see.
About it. It seemed like it like almost went into the public domain.
Yeah.
But not quite.
Have you ever? This is a thing that I've like thought about. Is basically tons of things are entering the public domain every year now. Poems and songs and whatever. And I'm always like, man, I wonder when we're gonna see the next wave of things that have entered the public domain like this year.
Yeah.
So like, if you look at things entering the public domain in 2020, right? 19. So works that were copyrighted in 1924 can now enter the public domain. This includes things like Buster Keaton's Sherlock Jr., Fatty Arbuckle's Stupid but Brave, a silent version of Dante's Inferno that borrows from a plot from The Christmas Carol. The one big one was like, I think Rhapsody in Blue is now in. Rhapsody in Blue is now in the public domain.
Oh wow.
Turando, the opera that was in the. I think that was in Mission Impossible, right?
Yes, I saw that at the Met Opera last fall.
Yeah, so that's now in the public. So all these things are now in the public domain, and it's like, man, like there's just so much, and literature too. Like, Agatha Christie's The Man in the Brown Suit. You can now make your own adaptation of The Man in the Brown Suit if you would like, because it is in the public domain.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, just tap in. What was it? Tap in on like that Knives Out fever and just start making your own Agatha Christie movies.
Just do it. Yeah. All right. Well, I think we can wrap it up there. I hope people enjoyed yet another one of these commentaries. If you're interested in my work, I have a YouTube channel as well. YouTube.com/Dave Chensky. That's Dave Chen SKY. You can find all of my links below in the description. And Patrick, any other thoughts you want to share as we wrap up today?
Basically, everyone, I hope you're staying safe, taking precautions, flattening that curve. I really would love it if this could all be over sooner rather than later. And look, while you're stuck inside, if you haven't already, watch The Mask of Zorro.
Indeed.